The session's also titled Think. And that's because, just like in the last session, we're hoping that you'll think, but this is thinking about what you possibly might do tomorrow, next week, or the next quarter, and not necessarily taking a much more longer, wider view of things. So before I kick off, I was here last year, just on the other side of the aisle. Were any of you at MELT last year? Oh, you there. Fantastic. Oh, a few hands going up. OK. So we started this journey of having a conversation on what do we need to do with creative for digital last year. And for those of you who attended the session, we talked about this entire transformation that's happening because the screen is changing. And today is really going to be some of the new learnings that we have over the last 1 year on that same journey. So before I actually jump into all of that, let me just leave this with you. One, well, the session is think. We're just saying rethink, right? There's a reason why we say rethink. And I'm trying to cut a very fine line here for digital creatives from rethink to remake. Very often, the conversation that happens with brand custodians and creative partners is, oh, this is digital, let's remake it, right? Just go back to the drawing board, get new production schedules out, let's just remake everything. It's different. And while it's different, we don't necessarily believe it's the most efficient or the only way to do is to remake things. And so rethink is really where we want everyone to start stopping and moving on from. And that's what we're going to try and address. Now, why are we really saying this? I don't know if you've seen this earlier, but the top 2 research firms in the world did this meta-analysis of what makes a campaign successful, right? And in that meta-analysis, and they have ratios which change by around 10 percentage points here and there, but around 30% of a campaign's success comes from executional elements, which is the media that you deploy, the distribution approach that you take on your messaging, and so on. But a significant 70% actually comes from creative. It's the message. And if you really think back at intuitively, without looking at that meta-research that somebody might have done on 100 brand campaigns, what are you really trying to do? As brand custodians, you're telling your brand's story. And if your story isn't right, which is what is creative, you can have the most efficient distribution, the most amazing targeting or retargeting, and all sorts of things, but you're still not going to get your campaign to be successful. So creative really, really is very, very important. And we see that, also in terms of the time that's spent. We've run time surveys with brand teams, and we've seen that close to 50-60% of an average brand team's time gets spent on creative, which is fantastic. So again, why am I here? If that's already being done, I don't need to be here, right? But there's a fundamental change that's happening. And this is the change that anybody who's building for brands needs to keep in mind. There are 2 fundamental shifts we're talking about over here. One is the device, and the second is the consumer. Now, on the device side, like I mentioned, there is this entire piece of things being shot for a large cinema 30-foot screen, but being consumed on 3 inches. Right? Does anybody in this room know a creative writer or a director who doesn't aspire to script a Bollywood film or shoot one? Yeah, almost everybody knows one, right? Yeah. So that's innate, right? They learned that craft, and that's where the passion is. That's where their meaning is, if I'm borrowing on a few words from the last session. And therefore, it gets made for that beautiful, large 30-foot screen. But hey, where do you end up watching it? On 3 inches, right? And are there any GOT fans here in the room? See, now this gets a response. Did you guys get to see what happened if you were seeing it on your phone in the last episode, or just around one of those? No, right? Yeah, so what happened? Forget the story and all the controversy. I'm not going there, right? Those are too deep for me to get into. But it was amazing. Think of the epic production that would have gone into those, right? And it was designed for those beautiful, large 60-inch OLED or QLED, depending on whether you're LG or Samsung's fan, screens, which amazing dark black contrast. Where did it get watched in India? on this little phone. And what happened? When you were trying to see that on the phone, while you were driving to work or in the metro, what happened? You didn't see anything. Those dark screens were dark. I mean, they were like really, really dark. So you missed everything that was there. And so you can imagine everything that went into the production of that beautiful thing, but what happened? You didn't see it. So it's not a mistake that only brand guys make. Just to be clear, there are other folks who also do this. So you guys are not, if somebody's made that mistake in their communication, gone really, really dark, and then realized, oops, it's not visible on the phone, you're not alone. You've got very accomplished company for you now, considering the last 2 months of episodes, right? Second big thing is the consumer, right? And this is the other big change that's happened. Now, the consumer is still the consumer, irrespective of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all of that. Human beings are human beings. It's just that the way we used to treat human beings was singular. When I say singular, we would cluster 35 million people into one 2-line demographic, or if you were to get a little bit more detail, into a pen portrait, which would be another 2 paragraphs long, right? So I'm selling soap, 25 to 45-year-old woman, period. I want to get a little bit more detail, I put a pen portrait of another 1 paragraph around on that person. And we build messaging for that. Now, while you build a story for that 1 2-line description of 35 million people, when it gets watched by an individual. And that individualization is just not necessarily bought into our creative storytelling. It used to be tough earlier when the screen was what the television screen was, but in digital, that changes. So how do you start changing this mindset of building a story for a singular consumer versus individual consumers? These are the 2 big changes. And we've done a fair amount of research on this, but rather than going into those and what's the implications, I want to show you examples of a few brands who have been doing TV and have started to redo stuff and rethink stuff, and what's been their experience. So it's best for you to see that. Let's start with this. Anybody aware of this brand?
Silk lovers, here's your chance to get famous.
Kiss me. Close your eyes, miss me. Close your eyes, miss me.
Show us how to use silk.
Anybody who's not aware of this brand in this room, it's okay. You could be like extremely conscious and not know chocolates and this brand, but I didn't see a single hand going up. Now imagine the challenge of this poor brand person to try and increase awareness and saliency, right? Do you realize what's that enormous crushing pressure that this person has on their shoulders? So when Cadbury started having this conversation with us, we said, well, let's try something different. It's beautiful, the chocolate's amazing, everybody knows you. Let's try and look at the saliency and piece and how can you really get that going up a little bit. So what they did was, they said, our chocolate's for everybody. It's the same consumer, right? Remember the singular that is there. We said, but that singular could be consuming different stuff, at least on YouTube. So can you try and see how you want to make it more individualistic? And I think that to the kudos to the creative team, what you'll see now is how they actually change this for 4 or 5 different audiences, right? So there'll be videos. Can you just please make sure they play?
How to best use your hairdryer. Set the temperature. Blow heat for exactly 22.5 seconds. Ta-da! It's ready.
Kiss me. Close your eyes, kiss me.
As a country, we love to see somebody else applying lip color, blush, and mascara, right? The amount of views you have on those videos is not funny, right? So there's a certain population of viewers who will just see hours of someone else picking up a lip color and applying it, or a mascara and putting it on their eyelashes, right? And so when you want to talk to those users, Cadbury decided to do this, right? This was the first video you saw. Then you also have sports, right? People who want to see cricket, other sports. I mean, so since we're talking about both genders over here, let's look at sports. So they did something on sports.
Kiss me. Close your eyes, miss me. Kiss me.
Movie trailers. It's really huge in all digital video. Our teams have now gone and built a model which says the number of trailer views to box office results. And there's a clear correlation they've built, and we've seen it deliver on the last 8 releases to approximately an 85% accuracy, right? So movies fundamentally is a huge watch on YouTube. Now, how do you get chocolate into movies? Let's play this one, please.
Kiss me. Close your eyes, miss me. Kiss me.
And then there's travel, which is also another big genre.
Kiss me. Close your eyes, miss me. Kiss me.
My favorite is still that chocolate popcorn substitute. I mean, I can't imagine what happened to the guy after this. But, it's really fun, right? I mean, suddenly for a person who's just about to watch a movie trailer or get into that makeup video, you've got this specific individual creative, which is meant and goes back to still talk about dairy milk, right? And the silk print. Now, what did it do? This is what it did. This is the original, the rethink videos. We've just film stripped it. Now, for a brand which nobody raised their hands on in this room on awareness, there was an 8 percentile point jump on the original versus these, right? So you can start seeing this difference that's coming up. 8% for a brand like this is huge. It's not easy to get this done. It's a massive, now the number of 8 looks really, really small, so I'll show you some other numbers which are bigger. But this 8% for a brand like Cadbury's is massive, and it came about only because of this one change where they went from singular to individual. Right, let's show you another example.
ये
टूट गया, छोटे छोटे टुकड़ों में बट गया।
हाँ
मजा आ गया।
क्या
ये टुकड़ों में बट जाए मजा आ जाए कैंडीमैन क्रंची इट्स फन ब्रेकेबल फ्रॉम आईटीसी
टूट गया
This 30-second spot, when it comes on digital, has to contend with 2 things. On YouTube, it's the skip button. On Facebook, it's the scroll, right? So there are these 2 S words that they need to figure out and manage. And so when the team at IDC decided to say, let me just try and rethink what I need to do, and again, this is going back to my initial point about, it's not about remaking, it's just about rethinking the same asset. They did something which was slightly different. And then I'll show you the results of that later on. Can we play the second video, please?
ब्रेकिंग न्यूज बेटे की ऐसी हालत देखकर भी क्यों खुश है ये माँ क्यों 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 ये
टूट गया, छोटे छोटे टुकड़ों में बट गया।
हाँ
मजा आ गया।
क्या
ये टुकड़ों में बट जाए मजा आ जाए कैंडीमैन क्रंची इट्स फन ब्रेकेबल फ्रॉम आईटीसी
टूट गया
So not a single new frame was shot for this, right? So there was no incrementality in the production schedules. There was a bit of an editing job that was done. And the same asset which was working for TV was also rethought and made to work for digital. These are the film strips, right? What you note as the red bar, that's the point where skip happens, right? Really, really critical to see from a brand's perspective. If you're not going to be able to hook the user, they have the skip button. So if you see the top and see this entire flow, you have this hospital screen, and I know they muted out the audio in the beginning, but basically the background is of a monitor beeping away to glory. You have long shots, you have somebody there, not a single sort of spoken word. By the time you're reaching here, very, very high propensity, by the 3rd second that you've made up your mind to skip this communication. And if you've done that, you really don't know what's happening next. You don't know what the story is, you don't know what the brand is. Let's see what they've done in a tweak. They got the mess branding up. Many times we've heard this conversation saying, hey, if you put the brand up front, it kills my story. Didn't kill the story here. And then if you notice, the way the talents got in, it's all close-up shots which have been brought up earlier to really hook the user and engage them right up front into this. And then there was a bit of a Ekta Kapoor sort of special effect that was added just around the point when you're induced to skip to counter that. And look at what happened. View-through rates at best in class, 18% lift in awareness, and for a candy, 23% lift in consideration or basically willingness to buy for a candy. Just that's really the difference your creative can make. And which is why I wanted to tell you, these are bigger numbers than the 8%. So I'm hoping you now sort of see value of that. But that's what the power of a good creative is. When played against the original, that's the difference that it can actually evoke. We've done sweets. We'll move to something that's a little bit more digital, which is, we heard about this brand in the last session, right? They're doing some shopping stuff, which is not very meaningful. But let's see what they did with their videos.
Can we do something more romantic?
More romantic than this?
Yeah. Somewhere fresh.
I'm fresh, I'm fresh. I'm fresh, I'm fresh. Come on, say.
What next?
Let's do something fresh with fresh collection from top fashion brands on Amazon Fashion.
I'm fresh.
So you saw last was how someone redid the story arc with ITC for digital. With this, there wasn't too much of a change of the story arc. But what they did was they took the nuances of the fact that this is going to be watched on mobile, and they tweaked that to start seeing the same video to see so how it will work better on mobile, right? So let's see the second film, please.
Can we do something more romantic?
More romantic than this?
Yeah. Something fresh.
I'm fresh, I'm fresh. I'm fresh, I'm fresh.
What next?
Come on, say.
What next?
Let's do something fresh with fresh collection from top fashion brands on Amazon Fashion.
I'm fresh.
I don't know how many of you noticed it. Right in the beginning, there was a difference that was created in the opening. But really, the big pieces was how there was a lot of space that was there, which was left, which is often done in TV shots, because you take these long shots, like I said, meant for cinema, and if you have a lot of empty space at times in frames, and they use that empty space to actually bring about and show as part of their catalogs. And that made a huge difference to what the actual action was that they got from online. This was just a view-through rate uplift, right? So if you look at the original versus the revised, there were just minor tweaks. There were minor tweaks in the opening. There were some tweaks, like I showed later on, which were in terms of the catalogs. But they made the messaging a lot more relevant for a different audience. For an audience which knows that, hey, I think I like this, I can tap and get to it and actually do something. And so that's a huge difference. Also, just to give you a sense of small things which are very often not considered, thumbnails. You scroll up videos, you see those small thumbnails? The original thumbnail was this. The revised thumbnail was this. Does that seem interesting? The second one, more than the first one. And so these are the small changes. If you think of on mobile, when you see that, a lot fairly dark, long shot, you're not sure whether you want to get into it. When you see this, you're like, hey, let me just check this out. And those are the sort of differences that you need to create when you start rethinking your assets. Like I said, in both the last two cases, there was no remake. It was just rethinking what you had from your original into something that's right for digital. Now, this is the core, right? I talked to you about two changes. We talked about the fact that there were two big changes that have happened. The device has changed, the consumer has changed. But really, what's not changed is attention. Stories have always been told for attention. It's just, where is this attention going now? We did this study on eye tracking, and we said, let's see where this attention is. The interesting part is, with this and another study that we did, we realized there is this amazing new thing that's happened. There's either very scarce attention, or there's very plentiful attention. So attention has moved to extremes. There used to be a certain level of attention that used to be available earlier, fairly constant, and all brands used to try and work around that. What we have now is these two extreme levels of attention. An attention span, which is very, very scarce because you can lose the user in a scroll or a skip. And then there is this attention span, which is like, hey, I have taken and I have given the permission to see this content. And then that becomes plentiful. And we've seen that when brands manage to go over this curve and tell real stories, that attention span can go as high as a minute, 20 seconds easily. So you can go up to 80 seconds and hold attention. But when you don't hold it right, you can lose it in less than 5 seconds. Right? And so that's really the big gap that's happened. Now, most brands would like to tell the 120 seconds or the 90 or the 100-second tales, but it doesn't happen every day, right? Because a lot of your core communication has been made for TV, which is 30 seconds or 20 seconds. So it's important to see how you sort of rethink that, and which is what I was trying to show you some examples of. That you take that same 30, which has been designed for TV, and put it back into digital, versus trying to make really long, completely new crafted stories at all points of time, because you might not have the budgets to do that. This, incidentally, is just eye tracking, which told us how attention spans vary on different screens. So while we believe television has a lot of attention, actually there's a lot of, barely 50% of the time is the eyes on screen. The remaining 50%, it's actually everywhere outside the screen. So while we can't measure attention very, very sharply on TV, you can, when you start seeing that difference happening in digital, you know how to sort of start taking care of it. Now, because of these changes, we decided in the beginning of the year to start a project called the Journey of Light. If you really think of it, all that we're talking about here, which is the video and stuff, this is really light. And there is this movement of light that's happened from the silver screen to the phones. And that's really impacting a lot of the craft that we are now talking about. It's impacting how you tell your stories, how you write them. It's impacting how you actually craft them. And so that conversation is this project called the Journey of Light. And for that, along with all the meta research that we are doing, so what we're literally sitting down right now, we have teams which are tagging every frame in a video, seeing what's working and not working, and building on that metadata. But what we also have, because we know this is a huge ecosystem change, is we have a council which covers everybody from a person who signs off the brief to the teams which actually make the creative stories, to the teams who actually shoot them, and to the teams who measure them. So if you think of it, it's the full circle, because the change that's happening is happening across the brand campaign ecosystem. Right? So you're looking at someone who says, hey, this is what you guys need to make. And there's a person who says, okay, I'm going to make it. And the person will say, okay, you decide what the story was. I'm actually the person who's going to put this on ground. I'm going to hold the camera and get the schedule and the shots going. And then finally, somebody measures it, right? And so the entire ecosystem is really what we're trying to bring together with this entire rethink piece. The first phase of that is reframe. How many people in this room have made the same video in multiple aspect ratios? Raise of hands. Yes, you can see almost like 10% of the room saying that. Now, it's not an easy thing, right? I remember having a conversation with some of the regional brand teams that we work with, and their point is, hey, I make one asset, and then I need to make it for 10 markets. So I possibly do 10 edits. But hey, I make a long edit and a short edit for TV. So what would just happen? We made 20 edits. Now, you're coming and telling me, hey, that one singular audience on TV should be around 4 to 5 audiences on digital. What happened? I went from 20 to 100 assets. And by the way, the blue brothers and the red brothers don't talk. And so there is 1:1, there is 9:16, there is 2:3. And what happened to your assets right now? You just went to 500 assets. Just from 20 to 500. Pretty much the broad ratio that you're working with. That's the overload that's getting created. And when you start saying, hey, I need to make so many assets, there's also this, how much money do I spend in making those assets? Do I start reshooting all the time? Or do I end up doing like really sort of averaged out post edits? And that's why this entire conversation of the first part of our journey in this entire rethinking is how do you reframe? And this is a good example of what happens. This is a Vietnamese commercial, so just stay with the visuals.
Điều tốt đẹp đầy ắp quanh ta, dẫu có hoài nghi. Xí xóa siết chặt yêu thương, cùng tin vào muôn điều tốt đẹp, cho Tết gần nhau hơn.
Now, if I was to take this original, which has been shot for TV, and see what's the adaptability of this commercial to all the digital formats, this is what it looked like. Think of the red ones as completely unsafe zones, which would be outside 1:1. Think of this as the safe zone, which will appear in vertical formats, right? So really the core is what's really available. Can we play that, please?
Điều tốt đẹp đầy ắp quanh ta, dẫu có hoài nghi. Xí xóa siết chặt yêu thương, cùng tin vào muôn điều tốt đẹp, cho Tết gần nhau hơn.
So if you were seeing just the center or the square, you'd miss a fair part of the story. And that's the challenge. When you frame for television or the standard old way, are you really doing a multi-aspect framing? So how math-friendly, as we say, are your storyboards? And so this is what is. This storyboard is actually around 35% or so multi-aspect friendly. Very simple way of doing this is just sort of look at the original storyboard and at that time, try and start seeing what's possible and what's not possible. Having said that, it's okay if you didn't think of it that time. There are great ways of possibly tweaking it and making it vertical. Can we play these 3 videos one by one?
Điều tốt đẹp đầy ắp quanh ta, dẫu có hoài nghi. Xí xóa siết chặt yêu thương, cùng tin vào muôn điều tốt đẹp, cho Tết gần nhau hơn. Điều tốt đẹp đầy ắp quanh ta, dẫu có hoài nghi. Xí xóa siết chặt yêu thương, cùng tin vào muôn điều tốt đẹp, cho Tết gần nhau hơn. Điều tốt đẹp đầy ắp quanh ta, dẫu có hoài nghi. Xí xóa siết chặt yêu thương, cùng tin vào muôn điều tốt đẹp, cho Tết gần nhau hơn.
So there's a bunch of ways that you can take a horizontal and make it vertical. But for those, if you were a brand manager from Coke who was trying to approve these, you'd struggle because there are many parts of that beautiful wide story that do get cropped off in this. And which is why we're saying, start thinking at the stage when you're doing your initial frames as to what do you need to, how do you need to design those frames and make it different. And to that effect, we got together a couple of the top DOPs in the country. And we said, can you start thinking of some of the most common frames that you see in advertising? Right? Well, every ad is different. There are some frames that are fairly common. Right? You've seen like somebody holding a product like this at the end of a frame. Could be shampoo, could be detergent, could be cream, could be whatever, right? So there are some very, very common frames that exist. What would you do in that case? And we asked them that if you were given this challenge of trying to take that original shot, which you've done for like 500 ad films till now in your career, and start rethinking that, is there something that you can do? And I'm just going to let this play on to sort of show you what they did.
We all have tales to tell. Over time, our tales and our telling both have changed. Let's begin from the start. As the frames started moving, the tale remained the same, but the telling changed. As storytellers were able to weave in more magic, how the stories were told became even more important. The long white shots on silver screens adapted to more personal frames on a television box in our living room. As the TV screen went through a generational change, becoming wider, the BBC decided to introduce a framing guideline. Shoot and protect, so that no matter what the size of your TV screen is, everyone will always see the full frame, the full story. And now, we are in the middle of the next generational change. The screen has moved into our hands. Held horizontally like a TV? Yes, sometimes, but also vertically many other times. Is it time our telling changed again? Humans have forever yearned to see stories on bigger and bigger screens. But are we using the screen we have?
A brand's content is probably being consumed on mobile millions of times every day, sometimes horizontally and sometimes vertically. But if we don't frame the content right, we're losing a lot of the screen space and possibly the chance to engage with the consumer. Is it time for us to reframe?
The only things to be kept in mind are the challenges and opportunities that these various screen sizes and formats throw at you. So let's look at all that and tell a great story.
Storytelling is critical, but if we think through the frames, yes, we can reframe and compose to suit variety of canvases. You see, it all depends on how we see things. Have you ever seen this frame in any ad? Babita ji? Like this. This is the new frame. The story is unchanged. We just reframed it. Now make the frame vertical. Now let me show you another slightly common frame. Now let's reframe and make this multi-aspect friendly. Perfect. Now take the camera behind the boy's shoulder. Perfect. Finally, I bet you never seen this frame, the money frame. Now let's reframe. Perfect. So if you ask me, Kiran, can you shoot a story that can be used in multiple aspects? I would say yes. Let's just reframe our thinking before we shoot.
So Kiran's done a lot of films. I don't know if you know, there's a bunch of very large films in Bollywood, which are like huge magnum opus, very large frame screens, which he's done. And when we told him this, his first reaction was, but why? I mean, the beauty is going to get lost. But then when he started seeing the amount of content that he's created and possibly the views that got in cinema screens versus on the phone, he said, hey, I get this. Like some of my frames which I made would be completely not trying to say what they were meant to say on the phone. And he came around and did this. And so if you notice, it's the most important part in this entire thing was not really how the frames could get redone, because once you set your mind to it, that will happen. It's what he said in the end. It's we start thinking early on, before you start this entire journey of building your creatives, all of this is possible. You need to start rethinking that early. And so really, that brings me right to the end. So if this room today wants to say, hey, what are we supposed to rethink? Well, there are three people and there are three different stakeholders who are here. And so the brand teams will say, when you're briefing, ask for a digital edit, right? It's important that you put your ask right up there and then, and not when everything's passed on, closed, and then you wake up and say, oops, I needed this too. When the director is gone, the studio's been, studio's away, and the poor creative partner is then scrambling to figure out what to do. At the PPM, check for this aspect friendliness. It doesn't take too much to overlay a grid and check for this and see, are your frames really at the right level? Take your animatics and put those grids on top. Or reach out to us and we'll give you a report which tells you how much aspect friendliness does your screen have. For creatives, now that's a different story. Creatives have been used to that one eureka idea and one story. How do you now create slightly more flexible storytelling around it? And if you notice the space of content, That's already happening there. And content's a great precursor to what happens in advertising. So you're seeing a lot of content that's coming up which is allowing users to make choices on what's going to happen to the stories. If you were to sort of start thinking like those content creators when you create your ads, it's easy for you to create flexible storytelling. So think about the multiple audiences and not that singular audience, and start creating those stories. And make sure that when you build that one 30-second spot, you also think of the longer or the shorter edits at that same time. Because once you've thought of all of those at one go, it'll be easy for you to manage. And when you take that entire piece saying, hey, I have these 4 scripts, which was actually one master script, but like 4 variations of that, and you go back to your production teams, they can actually reframe the shots. They're the ones who are going to sit behind and see the camera frame and say, hey, what do I need to do to make this shot work on different screens? What's the schedule I need to set up? How do I need to get my talent? How much studio time I need to book to make sure that I'm making not one edit, but multiple edits? And really, if you were to just start rethinking at the beginning, a lot of this would get solved. So that's really what I had to tell you today. Just start rethinking right at the beginning. We've started taking the first part of this journey around framing, which is what I showed to you right now. But if there's anybody in this room who thinks there is more, they have an observation, they think there is something that we should be doing, feel free to drop me an email. What we're doing is a collaborative project. It works with the industry. It works with all the stakeholders who are out there. So we're happy to sort of get your views and go in this. The one fundamental thing we've learned is that the last time the industry saw the change was when black and white TV turned color. Since then, the change has been marginal. Nobody designed differently for standard TVs to plasma TVs to LCDs and OLEDs and so on. So there is this fundamental change that the industry is going through right now, which means all aspects, the full value chain has to change. And so if you have any suggestions on that, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.